Part 1. Picture this. You are a senior archivist of the Galactic Concordance Lexicon Bureau. Yesterday, you cataloged the formal kinship structures of 300 member species before the third meal cycle ended. Tonight, you are crouching in a dim records vault, your bioluminescence dampened to almost nothing, frantically slipping a forbidden paper document into the hollow chamber of a data crystal as the heavy footsteps of committee enforcers echo down the corridor outside. What did the archivists of the Lexicon Bureau do in their idle hours? They broke their own laws. You are hiding from the Definitional Purity Committee, terrified not of energy weapons, not of execution, but of a stack of paper, 42 footnotes long, written in the cramped, looping handwriting of a species none of us were supposed to take seriously. The contrast is absurd. You are a member of a hive consensus civilization that has stood for 19,000 standard years. You can recall, with perfect clarity, every word ever spoken by every VTHRE who has ever lived. Yet you are risking your career, your standing in the consensus, your very access to the shared memory pool, just to keep one battered notebook from being incinerated. If those enforcers catch you, the consequence is immediate. You will be severed from the consensus, cut loose from every voice that has ever loved you, made into a singular thing, alone, which, to a VTHRE, is a punishment crueler than death. Official concordance proclamations swear that the Standard Kinship Codex is a triumph of clarity. They swear that every member species submitted a clean, elegant, 50-word definition of family. They swear the catalog is complete. But the hidden subcommittee minutes I have read with my own 3 eyes expose the chaotic truth. Why would an entire civilization, billions of voices strong, risk absolute dissolution just for 42 footnotes scribbled by a species that does not even share a consensus mind? Before I tell you the rest of this story, I want you to understand something. I am not a historian. I am an archivist. My job was to file things, not to question them. And yet I cannot file what I am about to tell you. So I am dictating it instead into a private memory shard that will outlive me. If you are hearing this, then the shard found you, and the humans were right about more than even they knew. Let me begin properly. Let me tell you about the day the document arrived. Part 2. To understand what happened, you have to understand the Galactic Concordance. The Concordance is the great administrative body that binds together 4,012 member species across the cataloged spiral arm. It does not govern exactly. It does not command armies. It does something stranger and in many ways more powerful. It defines. It catalogs. It decides which behaviors count as civilization and which do not. At the heart of the Concordance sits the Lexicon Bureau, and at the heart of the Lexicon Bureau sits the Standard Kinship Codex. The Codex is the master document that records, for every member species, the official structure of their family unit, who counts as kin, who inherits, who grieves, who is owed care. The rules for submission were absolute. Every new member species, upon induction, had to submit their definition of family, 50 standard words or fewer, no footnotes, no exceptions, no qualifying clauses. The reasoning was elegant and on its surface kind. A short definition could be translated cleanly into every concordance language. A short definition could fit on a tax form, a medical waiver, an emergency contact field. A short definition kept the bureaucracy moving. For 19,000 years, every species complied. The VTHRE submitted ours in 11 words. Kin is any voice that joins the consensus and remains. Done. Clean. Filed. The Korath of the deep pressure world submitted theirs in 7 words. Family is the spawning pool and its survivors. Filed. The Melanari, who reproduce by budding, submitted theirs in 4 words. We are all kin. Filed. 399 species submitted within the limit. Some took fewer than 5 words. Some used exactly 50. None used more. And then, on the 17th day of the induction cycle, the human delegation arrived at the Lexicon Bureau carrying a wheeled cart. On the cart sat a bound document 340 pages long. It weighed slightly over 4 kilograms. Its title page read, in careful hand lettering, "A working definition of family," with notes. The intake clerk that day was a junior VTHRE named Senil of the Quiet Pool. She accepted the document, smiled the polite three-eye flutter we use with new species, and asked the humans very gently if perhaps they had misunderstood the assignment. They had not misunderstood. That was the first crack. None of us saw it for what it was, but men, even men who are not really men, even four-limbed bipeds from a wet little world on the outer rim, are not made of clean definitions. No matter how short the form, no matter how clear the rules. Part 3. Behind the polished marble corridors of the Lexicon Bureau, a quiet, fiercely protected world of dissent was already breathing. Most of us did not know it existed. I certainly did not. I was filing trade waivers in the subarchive when the humans walked in with their cart, and I did not look up. But the room where the humans were assigned, a small windowless office on the 14th sublevel, was about to become something none of the Codex authors had imagined. A sanctuary, a workshop, a quiet act of war against the cleanest sentence in the galaxy. In the coming cycles, I am going to tell you about the 42 footnotes. I am going to tell you about the Brennan Ledger, a worn paper notebook that 6 generations of human delegates carried in a leather satchel, and the rituals they performed before opening it. I am going to tell you about the night a delegate named Miriam Okonkwo stood at a committee podium and read footnote 37 aloud for 9 hours without sitting down, without drinking water, without breaking voice. I am going to tell you about David HSU, who was nearly arrested in a supply closet for the crime of operating a paper duplicator. And I am going to tell you about the 1,400 delisted species who were waiting, quietly, in the margins of the human document, species that the concordance had erased because their families did not fit, species that the humans, somehow, had been gathering names of for 60 years, hiding them in plain sight inside footnotes about step-parents and adopted cousins and chosen kin. We thought the humans were stubborn. We were wrong. They were not stubborn. They were patient. There is a difference, and the difference cost the Definitional Purity Committee everything. Part 4. Veshkaran 9 is not a beautiful station. It was built 6,000 years ago, in the early concordance period, when the great archive worlds were still being charted, and the Bureau needed a neutral orbital platform to house the growing administrative class. The architects were Korath, which means the corridors are too low, the lighting is too blue, and every surface is faintly damp from the humidity their species prefers. Most of us have simply learned to live with it. The station is shaped like a wheel within a wheel. The outer ring holds the residential quarters and the species-specific atmospheric chambers. The inner ring holds the Bureau itself. Between them runs a single grand corridor called the Hall of Submissions, lined floor to ceiling with sealed crystal slabs, each containing the founding documents of a member species. The hall is meant to humble visitors. It usually works. The human delegation office was nowhere near the hall. It was tucked away on the 14th sublevel, in a wing originally designated for waste recycling administration. The Bureau gave the humans this office because the Bureau did not expect them to need it for long. Humans were a small, recently inducted species. Their submission would be processed in a cycle or two. Their office would be reassigned. It was not reassigned. For 60 standard years, that small windowless room held the human delegation. And in that time, the room changed. If you opened the door, the first thing that struck you was the noise. 3 or 4 humans always talking at once, sometimes arguing, sometimes laughing, the air full of words layered on words. The walls were entirely covered in paper, small adhesive squares in 7 colors, scribbled over in 3 different alphabets, diagrams connected by hand-drawn lines, photographs, which are a human practice the Bureau has never quite understood, of faces and weddings and small children and aged relatives. The smell was extraordinary. Humans drink a hot, bitter liquid called coffee almost continuously, and the office always carried the rich, roasted scent of it. Mixed with paper, ink, and the faint sourness of dried sweat, it was, to a VTHRE nose, deeply disorienting. To the humans, it was home. In the corner sat a battered metal desk, and on the desk sat the cart that had once carried a 340-page document into the bureau. The humans never moved the cart. They treated it the way the Korith treat their spawning stones, with a quiet reverence I did not at first understand. That office is where the dissident species came. Not openly, never in groups, just one delegate at a time, slipping in after their official meetings, sitting in the spare chair, accepting a small ceramic cup of the hot, bitter liquid, and beginning, hesitantly, to talk about the family members the Concordance had decided did not exist. Part 5. I have to tell you about the ledger now, because nothing else in this story makes sense without it. The Brennan ledger is a paper notebook. It is roughly the size of a VTHRE forearm. Its cover is black, soft with age, the corners worn pale where countless human thumbs have held it. The spine is cracked. The pages are slightly yellowed. There is a stain on page 41 that the humans claim is wine and that I suspect is blood. They will not say whose. The ledger was started in the year humans count as 2387 by a woman named Helen Brennan, who was the first human ambassador assigned to the Concordance. The story, as the humans tell it, is this. Helen Brennan was given the standard 50-word form. She tried to fill it in. She sat at her desk on the colony world humans call Brennan's Reach, the world later named for her, and she tried for 3 full days. She could not do it. Every time she wrote a sentence, she thought of someone the sentence excluded. She wrote family as those related by blood, and she thought of her adopted brother. She crossed it out. She wrote family as those who share a household, and she thought of her mother, who lived 4-star systems away and called every week without fail. She crossed it out. She wrote family as those bound by law, and she thought of her closest friend, the woman who had held her hand through her husband's funeral, and who was bound to her by nothing at all that any law recognized. On the 4th day, Helen Brennan took out a fresh black notebook, wrote a working definition of family with notes on the cover, and began. She wrote until her hand cramped. She wrote until the candle burned down. She wrote her first definition, and then she wrote a footnote explaining why the definition was insufficient, and then she wrote a footnote on the footnote. When she died 26 years later, the notebook was 312 pages long. She had not yet finished. Her successor, a man named Tomas Reyes, inherited the notebook. He added pages. So did the delegate after him, and the one after that. By the time the document was formally submitted to the Lexicon Bureau, 6 generations of human delegates had written in it, in 6 different hands, with margin notes correcting each other and occasionally arguing with each other across decades. The humans treated the ledger the way my people treat the consensus memory pool. They did not raise their voices in its presence. They did not eat over its pages. New delegates were not allowed to write in it until they had read it cover to cover twice and could recite footnote 1 from memory. Footnote 1, for what it is worth, reads, "Any definition of family that fits on a single page is a definition that has refused to look at someone." The ledger sat on the metal desk in the 14th sublevel office. Every human who entered the room touched its cover, briefly, the way the melanari touch the rim of a budding bowl when they pass it. It was their cauldron. It was the center of their tent. And eventually, it was the weapon they carried into the chamber that ended the committee. Part 6. There is a word in my language that does not translate cleanly. The word is Veshukarath. The closest rendering in human speech is the ache of a category that does not fit. We VTHRE do not feel Veshukarath often. The consensus is generous. It absorbs almost every shape a VTHRE can be. But occasionally, very rarely, one of our young develops a mind that the pool cannot quite hold. They are not exiled exactly. They simply find that when they reach for the consensus, the consensus reaches back only halfway. This is Veshukarath, and it is one of the few experiences our species can describe but cannot share. Until the humans arrived, I had thought Veshukarath was a small and private grief, suffered by perhaps 1 in 10,000 of us, mostly forgotten. The humans built their entire civilization on it. I learned this slowly in the small office on the 14th sublevel over cups of the hot bitter liquid. I was not supposed to be there. My visits began as official archive consultations, which turned over months into something less official. I would sit in the spare chair, and a human would sit across from me, and I would ask them about a footnote, and they would tell me a story. A delegate named Ayana Tallhorse told me about her grandmother, who was not her grandmother by blood, but who had raised her after her parents died. The concordance form had a single field for primary caretaker, biological. It had no field for the woman who had taught her to braid hair and curse in 3 languages and ride a hoverskiff. The form, Ayana said, had not been built for her grandmother, so she had built her grandmother into footnote 9. A delegate named Yusuf Karim told me about his husband, who had died in a mining accident before their adoption paperwork was finalized. By concordance law, Yusuf had never been married. The child they had been about to adopt was returned to the foster system. Yusuf had spent 11 years writing footnote 22. He told me he did not know if it would bring his husband back into the record. He told me he had to try anyway. A delegate named Priya Akafar Singh told me about her 3 parents, which is a configuration the concordance does not recognize, and about her half-sister, who shared no genetic material with her but who had slept in the next bed for 17 years, and about her chosen mother, an elderly neighbor who had taken her in when her biological family did not want a child with her particular medical condition. I asked Priya foolishly why she did not simply pick one of these arrangements and submit it. The form, after all, allowed for 50 words. Priya looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, because none of them are lies, and I am not going to choose which ones to erase. That was the moment I began to understand what the humans were doing. They were not refusing to define family. They were refusing to perform the small, daily, bureaucratic violence of cutting people out of it. I went back to my quarters that night, and for the first time in my adult life, I did not join the consensus pool before sleeping. I sat in the dark, alone, in a silence that ached, and I tried to think a thought that was only mine. Part 7. The footnotes are works of art. I do not say this lightly. I have catalogued the great Korath pressure poems and the Melanari budding songs and the 70-volume autobiographical murmurs of the Ethelin. I have spent my life among the recorded beauty of 4,000 species. The human footnotes belong on that shelf. Footnote 4 contains a diagram. It is hand-drawn in 3 colors of ink, and it maps a blended family across 3 generations. There are solid lines for biological descent, dashed lines for legal adoption, dotted lines for what the humans call chosen kinship, and small hand-drawn hearts beside the names of family members who are deceased, but, the footnote insists, are still part of the structure. The diagram is messy. It loops back on itself. One person appears in 3 different positions because, the footnote explains, Aunt May is also a godmother and after the divorce also a stepmother. The diagram cannot show this cleanly. Neither can the family. They love her anyway. Footnote 11 is a list. It is 47 entries long. Each entry is a single name and a single sentence. The names are people who, by strict concordance definition, are not family to anyone listed in the main document. The sentences explain why they should be. Mrs. Halloran, who fed 3 generations of latchkey children after school and asked nothing in return. Mr. Akinwell, who taught my father to read when my grandfather would not. Sister Beatrice, who is not anyone's sister by blood but who is, by the only measure that matters, mine. Footnote 23 is a poem, 6 pages long, written in the careful hand of a delegate named Eli Brennan, who was Helen Brennan's great-great-grandson. The poem is about a widower raising the child of his dead brother. It does not rhyme. It does not need to. The VTHRE translation engine, when I fed the poem through it, returned an error message I had never seen before. The error read, "Content exceeds translatable register." Suggest manual interpretation by a speaker who has lost someone. I read the poem twice. The second time, I had to stop on the third page. Footnote 31 is, I'm almost certain, a recipe. It is for a stew. The ingredients include whatever is in the pantry and the patience to let it simmer. The instructions include the line, "This stew is for the people who show up." Family is, in part, the people who show up. Make enough for them. It is filed under the legal subsection definitions of household, and I do not entirely understand why, but I have read it 4 times and I think the humans meant exactly what they wrote. I confess to the memory shard and to whoever finds it that I have wept over the footnotes. The VTHRE do not weep often. We do not have tear ducts in the human sense. But there is a wet, shuddering hum we produce when the consensus has been moved beyond its capacity to hold, and I produced it, alone, in my quarters, after reading footnote 23 for the first time. The humans, when I told them this, were not surprised. They simply nodded, and Yusuf Karim poured me another cup of the hot bitter liquid, and Priya Akafar Singh patted my forearm with the strange, brief human gesture they call there. I did not know what to do with it. I think I am still learning. Part 8. The office on the 14th sublevel became, without anyone formally deciding it, a sanctuary. It began with the Korath delegate. Her name was Threll of the Sixth Pressure, and she came one evening to deliver a routine trade document, and she stayed for 4 hours. She told the humans about her clutch sister, who had died in the same spawning cycle Threll had survived, and whom the Korath Codex entry did not mention, because Korath family records traditionally listed only survivors. Threll told the humans she had been carrying her clutch sister's name in her own throat pouch for 70 years, and that she had nowhere to put it. The humans listened. Then Ayana Tall Horse took out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote down the clutch sister's name. She wrote down the date of the spawning. She wrote down what Threll remembered of her clutch sister's particular shade of pressure luminescence. She handed the sheet to Threll and said, "We'll add her. Footnote 38. She'll be in the next revision." Threll did not have words for what this meant. The Korath rarely do. She simply pressed her forehead ridge against Ayana's hand and remained there for some time. After Threll, others came. The Melanari delegate came to talk about budded children who had been reabsorbed before maturation, who under Melanari custom were not counted as having existed, but who the delegate herself remembered. The Ethelin delegate came to talk about the bonded singer who had shared her hive for 40 years and who had no legal standing under the Codex. A delegate from a species I cannot name, because their world was delisted before I learned to spell it properly, came to talk about a parent who had transitioned between 3 of their 7 recognized sexes during the delegate's childhood, and who under concordance law was therefore 3 separate people, none of whom were legally allowed to be a single parent. The humans wrote it all down. They did not promise. They did not solemnize. They simply wrote it down in the ledger in fresh footnotes that grew like new branches on an old tree. By the 3rd year, the ledger had grown from 340 pages to 460. By the 5th year, the humans had to commission a 2nd volume. This was, of course, completely illegal. The submission to the Lexicon Bureau was meant to be a closed document. Once filed, it could not be amended without a full resubmission, which would have required committee approval, which would never have been granted. But the humans were not amending the official submission. They were keeping a private record, and they were, very quietly, copying that private record by hand and sending it back out to the delegate species who had given them the names. The Definitional Purity Committee did not yet know this. They thought the small office on the 14th sublevel was a curiosity, a failed delegation that had filed a long document and then refused to update it. They thought the humans were stubborn. They thought stubbornness would pass. It did not pass, it compounded. Part 9. I should tell you about the hearings, because the humans treated them the way the Korath treat their endurance trials. A hearing in the Lexicon Bureau is a procedural matter. A committee member asks questions. A delegate answers. The transcript is filed. The matter is closed. Most hearings last under an hour. Most delegates simply confirm what is already on the form and leave. The humans did not do this. The humans turned hearings into a sport. They trained for them. I saw this with my own eyes. In the office on the 14th sublevel, when there were no visitors, the humans would set up 2 chairs facing each other, and one human would play the committee, asking aggressive, narrow, hostile questions about the document, and the other human would defend. They called it prep. They did it for hours. They graded each other. They kept notes on which lines of questioning worked and which failed. David HSU, who I have not yet introduced properly, was the best at it. David was a small, soft-spoken man with gray at his temples and an apparently endless patience for procedural minutiae. In prep sessions, he was devastating. He would let an opponent build a long, confident argument, and then with a single quiet question, dismantle the foundational assumption it rested on. You said family requires legal recognition, he would say. Recognized by which body? The Bureau. The species' own government, the colony council, in what year, whose year, and the other human would have to start over. The humans had a saying about David: never let him near a definition you are not prepared to defend. They said it fondly. When real hearings came, the humans walked in carrying the ledger and a stack of cross-referenced index cards, and they did not lose. Not once in 60 years. The committee would press them on a footnote, and the humans would calmly produce, from their cards, the precedent that proved the footnote was internally consistent with 3 other concordance documents the committee itself had ratified. The committee would press them on a contradiction, and the humans would, just as calmly, produce a footnote that resolved the contradiction by introducing a new definitional layer. It was, in its way, beautiful. The humans had taken the dullest activity in the catalogued spiral arm, the procedural cross-examination, and turned it into an art form that combined memory, patience, rhetoric, and an almost terrifying willingness to be polite under pressure. The committee began to dread hearings with the humans. I know this because I filed the committee's internal scheduling notes. The notes contained, increasingly, phrases like postpone if possible and send a junior member. The committee was being worn down. They did not yet understand that this was the point. The humans were not winning hearings to win hearings. They were winning hearings to keep the document alive. Every hearing the committee failed to dismiss them, it was another cycle in which the ledger could grow. Part 10. I have not yet told you about the duplicating. This is the part of the story that, if it became public, would have ended the human delegation entirely. It is also the part of the story for which I am most personally responsible, and so I will tell it honestly. The humans were copying the ledger. Not officially, not with Bureau approval. By hand in the office on the 14th sublevel, late at night, with a small mechanical paper duplicator that David HSU had smuggled aboard Veshkaran 9 inside a crate marked cultural reference materials. The duplicator was loud. It clicked and hummed and occasionally jammed. The humans operated it only when the corridor outside was empty and the committee enforcers were on the far side of the station. They were copying the ledger so that they could send copies to the delegate species who had contributed footnotes, so that those species could, on their home worlds, begin to use the human definitions as legal precedent. So that slowly, the language of the ledger could leak into 4,000 civilizations at once. I helped them. I did not mean to at first. I came to the office one evening to return a borrowed reference text, and I found Ayana Tall Horse hand-stitching a duplicated copy into a leather binding, and I asked, foolishly, what it was for. She told me. I sat with the answer for several minutes. Then I told her that the Central Archive had a much faster duplicator on the 7th level. and that the access codes rotated every 6 days, and that I happened to know the codes. I did not know I was going to say this until I said it. For the next 11 years, I duplicated the ledger. The most dangerous night was the night David HSU was nearly caught. He was in a supply closet on the 3rd level, running a fresh duplication for a delegate from a species the committee had delisted the previous cycle. A committee enforcer, walking an unscheduled patrol, paused outside the closet. David heard the footsteps stop. He heard the enforcer's translator bead chime as it queried the closet's contents. He had perhaps 4 seconds. He stopped the duplicator. He picked up the half-finished page. He folded it once, twice, 3 times and slid it into his mouth. Humans, it turns out, can swallow paper if they have to. He swallowed it. Then he opened the closet door, smiled at the enforcer with the slightly embarrassed smile humans use when they want to be dismissed as harmless, and said, "Sorry, I got turned around looking for the restroom." The enforcer, who had been trained to look for weapons and contraband, and not for small gray-templed men with paper in their teeth, waved him along. David came back to the office on the 14th sublevel. He sat down in his chair. He drank an entire pot of the hot, bitter liquid. Then he said, "We need a faster duplicator," and Ayana laughed so hard she fell out of her chair. I think about that laugh often. I think about how the humans, in a moment of genuine danger, had chosen joy. The concordance had no category for that either. Perhaps it should have. Part 11. And so we come to the footnote 37 hearing. It was scheduled originally as a routine procedural review. The committee had decided at last to move toward formal dismissal of the human document. They were going to declare it unworkable, unfillable, in violation of the 50-word standard, and accordingly null. The humans would be censured. The office on the 14th sublevel would be reassigned. The ledger would be confiscated and almost certainly destroyed. The hearing was set for the Great Chamber, the largest procedural room on Vesh Karen 9. The committee did this on purpose. They wanted witnesses. They wanted the humiliation to be public. Miriam Okonkwo-Vance was the senior human delegate at that time. She was 64 standard years old. She had been writing in the ledger for 31 of those years. She walked into the Great Chamber that morning carrying the ledger in a leather satchel, accompanied by David HSU, Yana Tall Horse, Yusuf Karim, and Priya Akafar Singh. The committee was seated at the high bench. The galleries were full. The lead committee member, a Senari named Vals Threkar of the Long Knife, opened with what he believed was a closing argument. He read the relevant rule, 50 words, no footnotes. He held up the human document. He noted with theatrical disdain that it contained 42 footnotes. He moved for immediate dismissal. Miriam Okonkwo-Vance rose from her seat. She said, "Before the committee votes, I would like to read footnote 37 into the record." Vals Threkar permitted this. He believed it would take perhaps 10 minutes. It was, after all, a footnote. Miriam opened the ledger to footnote 37. She began to read. Footnote 37 is the longest footnote in the document. It runs, in the ledger, to 141 pages. It is structured as a series of nested case studies, each illustrating a kinship configuration that the standard 50-word definition would exclude. It begins with the case of a VTHRE child cut off from the consensus pool due to a genetic anomaly, and the human family who informally adopted that child during a diplomatic exchange, and the legal nightmare that followed when the child reached the age of inheritance in 3 separate jurisdictions. It moves on to a Korath clutch, where the spawning mother died and a non-spawning female of an entirely different pressure grade raised the survivors. It moves on to a Melinari budding line that diverged after the parent budded into someone the parent did not, by the end, recognize. It moves on to an Ethelin bonded singer pair where one partner lost the ability to sing. Each case is documented with names, dates, witness statements, and crucially, the names of the species that had contributed each case. By case 46, an alert listener in the gallery had begun to count. By case 90, the count had become impossible to ignore. By case 140, every delisted species in the cataloged spiral arm had been named, with a specific kinship situation, in the official record of a Lexicon Bureau hearing. Miriam Okonkwo-Vance read for 9 hours. She did not sit down. She did not drink water. She did not break voice. Her 4 colleagues stood behind her in a loose half-circle, and when her voice began to fray in the 7th hour, Iyana Tall Horse stepped forward and silently handed her a small lozenge of something sweet, and Miriam kept reading. In the 8th hour, Yusuf Karim placed a hand briefly on her lower back, and she straightened and kept reading. In the 9th hour, when she reached the final case, she paused for the first time. The chamber was utterly silent. Then she read the last sentence of footnote 37, which is the sentence that ended the committee. The sentence reads, "Every species named in this footnote is currently delisted by the Definitional Purity Committee on the grounds that their family structures are incoherent. The structures detailed above are not incoherent. They are simply longer than 50 words. The committee is invited to clarify which it has actually been objecting to." The chamber remained silent for a very long time. Valls, Threkar of the Long Knife, did not call for the vote. He could not. To dismiss the human document at that point would have required the committee to formally state in the record that the 1,400 named cases were incoherent. The cases were not incoherent. They were by then, on the official transcript, witnessed by every delegate in the gallery, translated into every concordance language. The committee tabled the motion. They tabled it again the next cycle. They tabled it for 3 years. By the end of the 3rd year, the dam had broken. Delegates from 160 member species had formally requested that the codex be revised to accommodate the cases in footnote 37. The committee was no longer setting the agenda. The footnote was. Part 12. The Definitional Purity Committee was dissolved in the 7th cycle after the footnote 37 hearing. The dissolution was procedural and quiet. No one celebrated openly. The committee members were reassigned, gently, to lesser archival duties, where most of them remain. The standard kinship codex was rewritten. The 50-word limit was abolished. The new codex, in its current form, runs to over 12,000 pages and continues to grow. Every member species may now submit any length of definition, with footnotes, with diagrams, with poems, with recipes if they wish. The Melanari, who had once submitted 4 words, have expanded their entry to 17 pages. The Korath have added a section on clutch sisters who did not survive spawning. The VTHRI, after a long and difficult consensus debate, have added an appendix on those of us who feel Veshukareth, and on the friends who sit with us in the silence. 1,407 delisted species were reinstated. The number rose, the following year, to 1,441, as new applications were processed under the new standard. The Brennan Ledger sits today in a sealed crystal slab in the Hall of Submissions, between the founding documents of the VTHRI and the Ethelin. It is the only document in the hall that is still being added to. Twice a year, a human delegate is permitted to open the slab, add fresh footnotes, and reseal it. The current delegate is a great-granddaughter of Miriam Okonkwo-Vance. Her name is Hannah. She is, I am told, very good at prep. I am old now. The consensus pool is patient with me, but I do not have many cycles left. I have asked, when my time comes, that my memory shard be filed not in the VTHRI archive but in the Human Delegation Office on the 14th sublevel. I do not know if they will grant the request. It is unusual. It does not fit cleanly into any existing category. I think they will grant it anyway. I think that is, in the end, the lesson the humans taught us. We asked them for a definition. We expected 50 words. We expected a small, clean sentence we could file and forget. They gave us a mirror, 42 footnotes long. They held it up to 4,000 species and said, "Here, look. This is what your families have actually looked like all along. We have been writing it down. We have been waiting for you to be ready. We have been arguing with our reflection ever since. The arguments are long. They are unfinished. They will outlive me, and they will outlive the humans, and they will outlive the station, and that, the humans would say, is exactly the point. Some truths cannot be made shorter without becoming lies. The refusal to simplify is itself an act of love. I am dictating this into a private memory shard. If it has reached you, then you are, by the only definition that matters, family. Footnote 43 is yours to write. Tell me when you find the time. Which of the footnotes moved you the most? Was it the diagram, the list, the poem, or the recipe? I would like to know before the consensus closes over me. I would like to carry your answer with me into the pool. I will be listening.